Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Emmett's weekly webinar featuring Alex Traiman discussing Israel's cognitive war. We appreciate you all joining us and your support for all of the work that we do. As a reminder, our annual Rays of Light in the Darkness Gala will be held on November 19th, and I hope you all can join us for what will be a very special evening. As always, today's webinar will be recorded. If you have any questions for our speaker, for Alex, please put them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and please limit them to questions only. I'm going to do a brief introduction. We'll get right into it because we have a lot to discuss. Alex Traiman is CEO and Jerusalem Bureau Chief of the Jewish News Syndicate, or JNS, as I'm sure you all know. A veteran Israeli journalist, radio show host, documentary filmmaker, and startup consultant. He writes on Israeli politics and U.S.-Israel relations. He has appeared on the BBC, Bloomberg, CBS, NBC, Fox, News Nation, and Newsmax, and is a frequent guest on WABC and CBS Radio. For those who don't already subscribe to JNS, I encourage you all to do so, including signing up for their newsletters, which are the go-to resource from my point of view on Israel and Middle East related news. So I encourage you to follow JNS and all of Alex's important work. Welcome, Alex. And as always, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.
Lori, thanks for having me.
Well, I want to focus most of our discussions on the anti-Israel media bias and Israel's battle on the cognitive war. I do want to start by spending a few minutes talking about the Israeli strike on Iran over the weekend, since it's so timely. On a podcast earlier this month, I heard you discussing what you anticipated for an Israeli retaliation, and you shared that you thought it would be significant and not proportional. I want to know if you're happy with the results of Israel's attack, which rightly, in my opinion, focused on ballistic missiles and air defenses, but also excluded nuclear facilities. Do you think that Biden played a role in tying Israel's hands on the nuke aspects of this? And also oil and gas? You know, the Biden administration told Bibi not to hit oil and gas or the nukes. And I've heard you, experts that have said that this is only Israel's, phase one. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the strike in particular, and where the administration has come into this, and whether you think that, Biden and Harris have argued that hitting the nukes would be an escalation. Do you agree that that's any more of an escalation than hitting the ballistic missiles and air defenses?
Well, I think we're already in this escalated conflict, like the shadow war between Israel and Iran that existed pre-October 6th, is no longer. The conflict between Israel and Iran is out in the open. Iran sent the largest ballistic missile attack in war history to Israel on October 1st. There was a second ballistic missile attack. There was a previous one on April 13th. And Israel now, for the first time, did more than a symbolic response. Like in April, Israel, symbolically hit one missile defense system, one air defense system inside Iran to demonstrate that they could do so. This attack was something much more significant. There was over 100 planes that participated in the attack. They hit over 20 targets. They basically have taken out, from what is being reported, all of the Iranian air defense systems in the entire country, basically, leaving vulnerable now every single one of Iran's strategic sites. And in addition to that, Israel attacked the missile production capabilities of Iran. And at this point, Iran was producing on a regular basis ballistic missiles, increasing its supplies, which it could use to attack Israel. The ballistic missiles are the most dangerous form of weapon that the Iranians had. They also sent in April cruise missiles and drones, and both of those attacks of the drones and the cruise missiles were able to be completely defended by Israel in the April attack. But these ballistic missiles get to Israel in about 10 minutes. And we saw on October 1st that many of the ballistic missiles actually did penetrate the Israeli air defenses. So Iran's ability to produce an unlimited number of these ballistic missiles is the most dangerous threat to Israeli security. So they took that out. In addition, Iran had been providing ballistic missiles to Russia for its war in Ukraine. So it is, in a sense, Israel was aiding Ukraine and the entire Western world by taking out this missile production facilities. So I do think that the attack is significant. I certainly think that the Biden administration tried to prevent Israel from attacking the oil and the nuclear facilities. And you're correct that this is considered by Israel to be the first salvo. They believe that this war is not over. And if they were going to do a first attack, this is what that first attack would look like. And now I think that Iran, Israel, the entire world is actually waiting to see what's going to happen on Tuesday this coming week. And on the basis of who will win the election, I think that Israel will recalibrate its strategy on how to carry forward future attacks. If, for example, Donald Trump will win the presidency, I do believe that there will be very close coordination between Israel and the United States on how best to make sure that Iran does not cross the nuclear threshold. And I do think at that point that this includes a very, very significant military threat, that it will be a coalition threat. And if Harris wins the election, then I think that you're more likely to see this tit for tat war where Israel continues to escalate slowly, wait for an Iranian escalation, and to move in that direction, making sure that each time that they strike, that they have basically the sign off of the United States. And we'll see what happens as it goes. I mean, it's hard to predict. I don't think that there's anybody on October 8th that would have predicted exactly where we would be today. And I think at this point, even a lot of Israeli leaders don't know where we're going to be. A lot of it depends on what's going to happen next week.
Yeah, I think that's unfortunate and probably difficult for the war cabinet in Israel to figure this all out. I mean, one of the things before I move on, I just wanted to ask you, I had also heard you talk about on the podcast what victory looks like for Israel, and you said beating the terrorists, normalizing with the moderates, and presumably you meant Gulf nations and Arab countries in the neighborhood. Do you think that that includes regime change? I mean, obviously, stopping the nukes is one thing, but what are your thoughts on Iranian regime change?
Well, they're the number one state sponsors of terror. It's this regime, the Islamic Republic, not the country of Iran, but the Islamic Republic that has destabilized the entire region. They've destabilized Iraq, they've destabilized Syria, they've destabilized Lebanon, they've destabilized Yemen, they've destabilized Gaza. They're trying to destabilize Jordan. They're trying to destabilize Judea and Samaria, commonly known as the West Bank. And while the nuclear weapons and the ballistic weapons represent an existential threat, it's the people with the fingers on the button, the ones that are developing those weapons, that are the cause of all concern. Now, an argument could be made that if you demilitarize the Islamic Republic, if they don't have a forward facing army in Hezbollah and Hamas, or the Houthis in Yemen, and they don't have ballistic missiles anymore, and they don't have nuclear weapons, well, then how dangerous are they, right? So that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is, if you take these leaders out, and if you look at how Israel's conducted the war both in Gaza and in Lebanon, it has made it a priority to take out the leadership. In Gaza, we've taken out Yahya Sinwar, we've taken out Mohammed Deif, and many of the other Hamas leaders. And in the north, we've taken out Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, the number two, Fuad Shukr, Hashem Salafaddin, who was going to be the one who took over for Nasrallah. And now that I believe his name is Naim Qassem, has taken over as the leader of Hezbollah. The defense minister, Yoav Gallant, tweeted yesterday, I think, that this will be a temporary appointment because he's high on the target list. So, if you carry this forward, I do believe that the way you stabilize this region ultimately is you take Iran back from the Ayatollahs, and you return the country to the people of Iran. The people of Iran have a very distinct and centuries old culture. They're proud peoples. They're very intelligent peoples. They have a lot of contributions to make if they're allowed to modernize and not to try to establish an Islamic caliphate across the Middle East and beyond. So I do think that this is the way forward is to try to replace that regime. But the question is, how do you do that? Do you do that by assassinating leadership? And we remember that the former president of Iran, Raisi, his plane crashed, and we don't really know the circumstances behind that crash. And maybe we can use our imaginations, but there's certainly no confirmed reports there. And Israel certainly assassinated nuclear scientists inside Iran. We saw that the Hezbollah just tried to assassinate Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu by hitting his house with a drone. So we don't know if Israel will target Ayatollah Khamenei. There's also reports that he's 85 years old and potentially in very poor health. So we don't know what that situation looks like, or if efforts will be made to support the Iranian people to overthrow their own regime. And if you remember back in 2008, you did have this green revolution. Iranians poured out into the streets in large numbers. There were sites similar to the original Islamic Revolution of 1979. But unfortunately, President Barack Obama threw his support behind the regime and not behind the protesters. So we'll have to see what's the best method. But certainly, if you want to bring stability in the Middle East, I think we have to identify the leaders of the instability, the leaders of this Islamic Republic, and figure out a different path of leadership for the people of Iran.
Thanks, Alex. I want to turn now to the post-October 7th media bias and Israel's battle in this cognitive war, which is in some ways, I think, far more dangerous since Israel can't really win it with powerful weapons and a powerful military. Pretty much from the moment Israel began its defensive response to the atrocities of October 7th, the media reaction was fierce and relentless as far as I'm concerned. The narrative shifted almost immediately from support for Israel to the delegitimization and demonization of Israel simply for defending its citizens from future and from promised attacks. Accusations of Israel committing genocide began almost immediately, and they continue through today. Really disgustingly, I think, with the Vice President of the United States and the Democrat Party nominee joining seemingly this insane labeling of Israel's defensive war as a genocide of the Palestinian people. It's not just the genocide, accusations, but it's just the mainstream media outlet regurgitating Hamas numbers on civilian casualties, which we know are not just inaccurate, but also do not take into account the historically low civilian casualty rate that Israel has miraculously achieved in this war. So how do you account for such a rapid turn against Israel with, it being the most moral army in the history of the war by a media that, just in the face of this horrific attack, just completely turned on Israel?
Yeah, well, this was really the Hamas strategy from day one, right? Yeah, Hamas is a pretty large terror organization. They might have as many as 30, 40,000 troops. They might have had as many as 40 to 50,000 Qassam rockets. Obviously, they committed a horrific massacre against Israel on October 7th. But really, since October 7th, they haven't been able to do almost anything. I believe that maybe two Israelis were killed since October 8th from a rocket that hit near the Erez crossing. But you see that they can't defeat the state of Israel because they're fighting against the IDF, which is one of the world's most technologically advanced and battle-ready militaries, right? So how do you win a war against the state of Israel when you're a terrorist organization? You're fighting the IDF. So certainly they committed an act which was large enough where they knew that they were going to bait the IDF to come into Gaza, and clearly they had booby trapped the Gaza Strip with tunnels and various positions to try to kill troops when they came in. They hoped that if troops would come in and all of a sudden there'd be hundreds of soldiers killed, that Israel might rethink its attack and stop in its tracks, and that would be a Hamas victory. Or the other way that they thought that they could defeat Israel is that they would invite Israel in, essentially, with this horrific October 7th massacre. The IDF would enter into the Gaza Strip, and then by hiding themselves among the civilian population, that the death tolls inside the Gaza Strip would rise, and then it would be reported through mainstream media and elsewhere what Israel was doing, and then that would garner international pressure against Israel, and then Western governments, including the Biden administration and obviously the United Nations and the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, would put pressure on Israel and force it to stop. And if Israel would stop in its tracks because of that pressure, that's how Hamas declares victory. So this has been the Hamas strategy from day one. And they have been planted seeds here, for a long time. I mean, you can go back to 1975 to the UN resolution, Zionism equals racism. I mean, these seeds were planted long, long ago. And if people remember the previous conflict between Israel and Gaza in 2021, it was a much smaller conflict. At a certain point, Israel bombed a building which was a Hamas headquarters in the Gaza Strip, and the entire international community went nuts because Israel had just bombed the headquarters of the Associated Press. And so you can ask yourself the question, why was Hamas's headquarters in the same building as the Associated Press? You don't have to be very good at math to figure it out. And really, you mentioned that in the very beginning on October 7th, so the whole world was with Israel, because on October 7th through the morning of October 8th, Israel was the victim. From the afternoon on October 8th until today, Israel's the aggressor. And that's why everything switched. And we were recalled, it was only 10 days into the war when Israel was accused of bombing a hospital in the Gaza Strip. It was the Ali Hospital. And they said that Israel bombed the hospital and killed 500 people. And all of a sudden, like wildfire, headlines in every mainstream media publication around the world said Israel bombed the hospital, killed 500 people. The only thing is that it wasn't Israel that hit the hospital. It was an errant Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket that was aimed towards Haifa that misfired and hit in the complex of the hospital. It didn't hit the hospital. It hit the parking lot outside the hospital. The morning after, you could see the little shrapnel marks on the facade of the hospital. The entire hospital building was still standing. And because the hospital parking lot was hit after midnight, the chances are there's no way that 500 people were killed, and probably not 100 people, and probably not even 20 people were killed by that rocket. So you have these three material details: that the IDF bombed a hospital and killed 500 people, and not one of those three material details was correct. But that didn't stop AP, Reuters, BBC, New York Times, and every other publication from reporting that. At the time, I was when we all heard this, we just, like, our heads were in our hands, because we knew that this was a possibility, that Israel would strike something. And then all of a sudden there was chatter, that maybe Israel didn't do it. So I'm actually on chat in real time with the Prime Minister's office and with the main spokesperson from the IDF at that time, and asking them if it's true. And they said, "We're checking." I said, "What do you mean you're checking? Like, we're getting killed here in the mainstream media. Everybody's reporting that you did it, and you're telling me you're checking." I said, "Tell me you didn't do it, and we can get that out there." They said, "Well, we can't say that we didn't do it until we check." I said, "Well, say you didn't do it and then check." They said, "No, people count on us. We're Israel. We try to, when we give information, we want people to trust the information that we give. So we can't just throw out information before it's checked." So you can only imagine how many different points of contact during a simultaneous aerial, sea, and land attack, could have hit that hospital at that time. So sure enough, within maybe an hour, I don't remember exactly, I got statements from the IDF and the Prime Minister's office officially stating that they didn't do it. And in fact, because I was in real-time contact, I actually had the statements before they were tweeted out. So JNS was actually the first media organization to report that it wasn't the IDF that bombed that hospital and killed 500 people. But if you will go on, and you could do this as we're talking, if you put into Google right now, Reuters, IDF bombs hospital, Gaza, kills 500 people. Okay. If you put that right now into your Google bar, you're going to get 20 different headlines about how the IDF bombed the hospital in the Gaza Strip and killed 500 people, and different people's international reactions to that, still to this day. Okay, so you understand from that episode, and there are countless other episodes, who the mainstream media is working for. Hamas understood this from the outset. They had already set this up. Okay, and so you have like 19 or 20 different Palestinian news agencies. You have the Qataris funding Al Jazeera to a budget of maybe hundreds of millions of dollars a year. You have the AP, Reuters. And remember, by the way, there were Reuters photojournalists and CNN photojournalists that were filmed participating in the October 7th attack. Okay, there was like a Facebook video of some photojournalist on his own page, and you see him holding a hand grenade over here, participating in October 7th. So they weren't just documenting an attack that they shouldn't have known about. They were actually participating in the attack in the same way that UNRWA employees are terrorists. Okay, so the mainstream media and all these UN organizations are all in collaboration with one another. It's a grand conspiracy against the state of Israel, and unfortunately, there's very few Jewish media that are fighting back, and we could talk a little bit more about it. I'll pause here to let you ask the next question, but it's not a lot of money is going into the Jewish media that are fighting back against it, and unfortunately, a lot of the other Jewish media are not doing a great job of it.
Amen to that last point in particular, and I'm glad you brought up the hospital. I think that's a great example. I'm going to bring up a couple more examples, and I mean, the journalistic standards that have been violated by our mainstream media in order to demonize and delegitimize Israel is just really distressing. But let's talk about Al Jazeera for a minute, because it's probably the most extreme example, since it's funded by Qatar, which has been funneling money to Hamas for years and harboring Hamas terrorists, including Khaled Mashal, who I believe is currently the highest ranking Hamas official alive today. And of course, the Biden administration likes to work with Qatar and refuses, I think, to address some of these major issues. But let's stick to Al Jazeera. The IDF has been releasing documents that prove direct ties between Hamas and Al Jazeera, but specifically, the latest documents showed that there are 6 active Al Jazeera reporters who were operatives in Palestinian terror groups. The IDF also published documents captured in Gaza that indicated close cooperation between Hamas and Al Jazeera, including papers in which the terror group advised the Qatari network not to criticize it, among other dictates. So with claims that it harms Israeli security and its close connections with Hamas, Israel imposed a temporary ban on Al Jazeera over the summer. And in September, it shut down the Al Jazeera headquarters in Ramallah. Do you agree with that measure? Because there's a lot of backlash to that. And do you think other countries like the US should do the same?
Well, if you understand that this is actually part of the Hamas strategy to win the war, and if the Qataris are the main backers of Hamas and are harboring Hamas's leadership there, and they're using their media organization, not just by themselves to publish, what's worse is that Al Jazeera actually sets the pace of a lot of the mainstream media coverage. So to a large extent, in many cases, AP, Reuters, New York Times are following Al Jazeera's lead with regard to what to cover and how to cover it. And that's why a lot of times the coverage of the mainstream media looks no different than Al Jazeera, right? So this is all coordinated. But if you understand that this is how Hamas expects to defeat the state of Israel, so it's a strategic imperative to shut down Al Jazeera in Israel. I don't know if the United States can figure out a way to brand Al Jazeera as a terrorist organization, and maybe through that kind of distinction ban them from operating in the United States. Obviously, the United States has freedom of speech, so they allow all kind of hate speech and other things, and that's protected First Amendment right, and it's probably in many respects better that it's protected than a regime of censorship. But that's a webinar for another time. But certainly, as far as Israel's concerned, I don't think that anybody that's providing material aid to a terrorist organization should be able to operate freely in the Jewish state at this point.
That's a good answer. I wish that we could label them a terrorist organization here. So another example is the BBC, which is also always egregious in its anti-Israel bias. But in September of this year, there was a 200-page report that was carried out by a team of lawyers and data scientists, and it disclosed that there were 1,500 breaches of the BBC's editorial guidelines and its systemic failures to maintain its commitment to impartiality and accuracy in reporting on the conflict or on the war, and it exposed significant bias in favor of the Palestinian narratives, while misrepresenting the facts about Israel. While presumably the BBC and Al Jazeera don't have wide reach in the US, they certainly do on the international stage. And any of us who have ever traveled overseas can find both of them on any television set that we turn on. So with this far reach, how can Israel counter the lies with its own programming? And you did bring up Israel, media, and we'll get a little bit more into print media in a minute. But I know that Israeli television can be picked up in the US, but I'm not sure how many people are actually watching that. So is there a way to get Israel messaging out more in the
Right.
international community?
I mean, one of the big disadvantages for the state of Israel is that the Israelis digest and make media in Hebrew. Like, we have a very robust media in Israel, but it's almost exclusively in Hebrew, right? There's no state-run English language media organization. And even if there was, there's no guarantee, because of the nature of the Israeli democracy, which can veer from right to left in any given point. That the messaging that any Israeli-based state-funded media organization would be necessarily helpful. I mean, if you look at some of the Israeli media today in Hebrew that are state-funded, they're highly critical of the Netanyahu government day in and day out. So and that's not what's needed during a war, by the way. You don't need the media of that country attacking the government that's fighting a war against Israel's enemies. In many ways, these media organizations and a lot of the English language media coming out of Israel, which isn't government funded, by the way. It's private, but it's doing the same thing. It's delegitimizing the government of the state of Israel day after day after day, and it's actually harming the Israeli war effort rather than helping it. So yeah, so first things first would be if we could get the Israeli media to stop harming the war effort. Then we could see if there was a way to help it. But there's a numbers game here. There's issues of just staying on message, right? Al Jazeera and all the others, they can tell that lie that Israel bombed the hospital and killed 500 people, and they don't care. They don't need to check those facts. Nobody holds them accountable after they did it. I mean, you have some organizations like Honest Reporting in Camera, and you get them to make corrections. And so the New York Times will have a full page, 2-page spread on Sunday morning about, before, and the year before the war, about how Israel is cramping the Gazan fishing industry in the Gaza Strip. And you have all these sob stories and 6 pictures, and you would never have a spread like that about any other topic. And then on Wednesday, that week, you on the bottom page 822, you have a small correction on the bottom of the page in italics. It says that the story forgot to mention that the number of fish that was collected in Gaza this year was 3 times the amount that was collected the year before. Right? Oops, we left that detail out of the story, right? So they can, and they'll stay on message, and that's something that, like Jews, we never do. We never stay on message, because every Jew has a different idea about what the message should be and how you say it. So we're at a significant disadvantage here, and it's not something that's easy to overcome. We're gonna have to get better at that.
I hadn't considered the language barrier, and there is the one station, I guess it's I-24 here in the US, that is
I-24, by the way, has pivoted itself into Hebrew, okay? And they put significant amount of the resources that used to go into English and other languages.
Yeah.
They've taken the resources away from English language. They've reduced the amount of English language coverage they have by about 2/3. They've scaled down the whole operation, and they've pumped it into Hebrew, which, from the international perspective, is not helpful at all. So,
Right.
you just don't have the types of resources, again, like Al Jazeera is putting hundreds of millions of dollars into just that one media organization. Here, like JNS, we're trying to do a better job than all the Israeli-based and the Jewish-based media. Many of them have bigger budgets than we do, but we're trying to fight against them, against all the Palestinian media organizations, Al Jazeera, all the mainstream media. So you're talking about an industry which could be $1 billion or more worth of coverage that's being invested to delegitimize and demonize the state of Israel, to get international pressure against the Jewish state, and it's working. And we're trying to fight against that with a $5 million budget. Now, I think we're punching above our weight, and we're doing a pretty good job for the amount of money that we have. But if we're gonna want to try to take down Al Jazeera, or to advance up the rankings, and then we're not even talking about the Google News algorithms and things like that, which are specifically suppressing pro-Israel content. I've seen reports that like on TikTok, for example, pro-Palestinian messaging will outperform will be outperform pro-Israel messaging by 1,000 to 1. I mean, so you have all the social media algorithms that are fighting against Israel. So it's really a battle that the Palestinians and the Qataris have invested a lot of money in, and the Jewish community's found itself like completely flat-footed and way behind. And at this point, I don't even know how you do win the war, but like I always give the example of Prime Minister Netanyahu when he was appointed to be the ambassador to the United Nations, and he went to visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe in New York, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe told him that he was going into a sea of lies and darkness, but it was his job to be the single light of truth, the candle of truth in that sea of lies and darkness. So that's what we try to do. That's at this point, it's the best we can do. And fortunately, when you have a dark room, the best kind of light is a single candle, and it's a very attractive light. So if you shine the truth, you hope that the good people of the world that recognize that there's a grand conspiracy going on here, and they feel in their hearts that the state of Israel is the force of truth and good in the world, and that the terrorists are the force of evil in the world, that the people will gravitate towards good information.
I think one of the problems is the takeover of the reporting pages of at least the U.S. newspapers by the liberal elites, for lack of a better word. And I mean, I gave up my subscription to the New York Times in 2003. I couldn't handle the anti-Israel and anti-America because we had gone into Iraq reporting. And now the Wall Street Journal pages are just as bad as far as I'm concerned. And
The news pages, the editorial pages are good, and it's a big internal dispute in the company between the op-ed pages and the news pages. But the news pages of the Wall Street Journal, at this point, you're 100% right. It's just as bad as the New York Times.
So let me ask you something. So this revisionism that we're seeing in news reporting, you talked about the hospital and how the media actively reported false facts to demonize Israel. But what they're also doing is they're denying the truth about what happened on October 7th. And they're denying that there was rape and there were beheadings of babies and people burned alive. And Hamas recorded the atrocities on their GoPro cameras. They put it out on social media. The Israeli government, I think, very wisely compiled clips into a 47-minute movie that was made available to journalists and to people in Congress, politicians here in the US, and anybody that wanted to view it. But we still see to this day a lot of denialism, despite the video being out there. I felt like the video should be shared far and wide on college campuses and maybe seniors in high school. What are your thoughts on that video and how maybe that could help with the bringing the truth about what actually really happened on October 7th?
I mean, I think it's like a snuff video, basically. It's not the type of thing that you want to start showing, like this gruesome barbarism. I don't know. I personally, I didn't even watch it. I don't want to see it. But I do understand that for policymakers and for other journalists, it's very important that they see it. I imagine that with time there'll be memorials and monuments and other videos and other information out there. But at this point, Israel's just got to win the war. I mean, it's you're not necessarily going to win the battle of public opinion, but what people do respect in public opinion is a strong horse. I think that the only way that Israel can actually recuperate its standing is to win a very decisive victory over Hamas, over Hezbollah, over the Islamic Republic, and then to go ahead and to normalize relations with the Saudis and effectively end this Arab-Israeli conflict. This is what you mentioned before that I said, Israel is transforming the Middle East. It's proven that it can make peace through these normalization agreements, the Abraham Accords, and it is policing the Middle East by removing the terrorists. So if Israel can reposition itself at the end of this war, then I think that people are going to be very proud of the state of Israel, and people are going to want to start working with the state of Israel. If Israel somehow doesn't win this war, okay, God forbid, and Hamas waves, the last remaining Hamas terrorists wave the banner of victory in the Gaza Strip, and they're holding hostages, God forbid, and are saying that they won, and the international community all of a sudden is going to pour billions of dollars into Gaza. Israel's pushed out. Hezbollah's still running around with the ability to fire rockets. Iran can still fire ballistic missiles. Then the international community is going to come around and say, look, you didn't even win, and look at all the damage that you did. You just tried to kill as many Palestinians as possible, but you didn't achieve any of your strategic objectives. So at this point, I think Israel's only possibility to regain the public trust is to win and to make it so that everybody in the region understands that Israel's done something amazing and incredible. And if you look back into history, probably the greatest moment for Israel was in the aftermath of the 1967 war. When Israel had the victory, like the stunning victory over the Arab armies that attacked us, all of a sudden the entire world was aligning with the state of Israel and felt very proud of the state of Israel. So that's I think Israel's all ace up their sleeve. That's their best card right now, is just to win the war and to win it conclusively.
Well, I'd like to believe that the nations that are watching Israel right now are feeling the same way that we do, that there's been just the miraculous achievements, and they are so far proving to be the strong horse. Another aspect of this revisionism is the narrative that, Israel's occupying land and it's an apartheid state. And the implicit bias that we see in the media is, I think, probably originates in academia. So I just want to touch on academia for a minute or two, because it's played a crucial role in the massive ignorance that we're seeing in world's populations, and generations are being indoctrinated. Does the media play a role? Can the media play a role in putting pressure on university administrations, boards of trustees to enforce codes of conduct, and even put pressure on the federal and state governments to enforce the law to protect Jewish students? But more importantly, also, again, is this indoctrination of our young people. And I know we could spend an entire hour talking about this, but do you have any thoughts on academia and how to reverse these narratives that are just so false yet being taught as fact?
Look, foreign actors have been investing heavily into changing the minds of our youth at the universities. The Qataris, in particular, even a few decades ago, the Saudis were very involved in this. They're a little bit less involved in it now, but specifically funding the Middle East study centers and choosing the deans and choosing the professors to sow a directly anti-Israel narrative on the university campuses. And not only are they affecting our youth, but because they've been doing this already for decades, we're now starting to see the graduates of these programs, running around the halls of Congress. You have congressmen, you have staffers in the State Department and in the Defense Department that come from these Middle Eastern studies programs, and they've been brainwashed already, and we're already seeing what the impact of that is. So, this is it's a very bad situation, and you see that how they work strategically to do this. And we were flat-footed. It was only on October 7th and in the aftermath, when we started to see these encampments coming up on the university campuses, that we realized, oh, wait a second, we have a problem. And certainly the mainstream media can have a role. And, JNS has done this many times. When the second something happens on a university campus, if a Jewish organization is trying to get the university president to do the right thing or make the right statement, or, say that the university doesn't support BDS or whatever it is, when the media calls up the office of the president and asks them for a comment, and then all of a sudden the president of the university understands that there's going to be media reports, and a Jewish media organization picks it up, and the next thing you know, New York Post and Fox and others are picking it up, and it snowballs. So certainly the media has a role to play as a police officer on the university campuses. But we've also seen for the first time, really, how philanthropists that have been kind of blindly giving money and putting their names on, the building of sciences and arts and other things like that on the very same campuses where the Middle Eastern Studies program and the liberal arts professors are preaching against the Jewish state and are intimidating Jewish students, that they're able to turn around to these university professors and say, listen, if you're not going to clean up this campus, we're not going to give money anymore. And you've seen the presidents of 4 or 5 different major Ivy League schools already resign, and then that pushes politicians to enforce the laws, like you see in Florida. I think is a good example, where Governor DeSantis has said, you don't see these things on our campuses, and because if we do see these things on the campus, then the schools are not going to get state funding. They're going to lose their funding. So yeah, it's there are tools that can be used. And if there's a will, there's a way to correct the issue on the university campuses. You can force Title VI. You can take away funding for universities, both on the private level and on the state and the federal level, from universities that don't protect Jewish students, intimidate against Jewish students.
Thanks, Alex. I want to also touch on UNRWA. So similar to the evidence that the IDF uncovered revealing ties between Hamas and Al Jazeera, the IDF has also provided proof to the world that the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, is also directly tied to Hamas. And, President Trump was aware of the problems within UNRWA, and he cut off funding. Of course, Biden, as he did with all Trump policy, reversed that the second he came into office. And he picked up the funding to UNRWA and to the PA, I should say. But now that Israel has proven that UNRWA employees double as Hamas terrorists, that they are abetting Hamas and keeping hostages, prisoners in their homes, that their infrastructure has been used by Hamas to conceal tunnels and weaponry, just as the AP facility was that you talked about earlier. And by the way, Simwar was also found with an UNRWA teacher ID card on him. So, I mean, the international community is ignoring this, and Israel just passed a very important piece of legislation this past week. So I'd like you to discuss this, that bans UNRWA from operating within Israel. How impactful do you think this will be, both within the longevity of UNRWA and whether you believe that it's going to be able to stick through this even with the Israeli legislation and the international community's backlash to the Israeli legislation?
Yeah, well, you actually have to back up before October 7th and before the links between Hamas and UNRWA, which everything that you said is correct. But people have to understand that the UNRWA is a multi-billion-dollar organization, which is founded for the purpose of perpetuating the Palestinian refugee crisis into perpetuity forever, and are basically guaranteeing the continuation of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There can never be peace between Israelis and Palestinians as long as there's an organization like UNRWA in place. Okay, in 1948, there were however many displaced Palestinians in the War of Independence. I think several 100,000, maybe 700,000. That number has to be checked. I'm not sure. But since that time, none of the Palestinian refugees have been resettled by UNRWA and taken off the list. Okay. And not only that, the refugee status of the Palestinians that were supposedly displaced then gets conferred onto second, third, and fourth generations. Okay. And there's no refugee crisis in the world, that has its own independent UN agency that deals with it. Every single other refugee crisis in the world is dealt with by a singular UN agency that deals with all refugee crises. And there's no refugee crisis in the world in which first of all, the people that are supposedly refugees are still living in the country that they supposedly were displaced from. They're living in homes, and their refugee status is conferred onto second, third, fourth, and fifth generation, so that today you have like 5 times as many refugees as you did in 1948. Okay, when they're all living in the same country. Okay, so And then in addition to that, UNRWA is actually the largest employer inside the Gaza Strip and potentially inside Judea and Samaria and elsewhere. And UNRWA is running most of the schools. And it's been proven time and again that the textbooks that are being taught from in these schools have direct incitement to violence. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that there were Palestinian textbooks that would have math equations that said if you have 10 Jews and 7 are killed, how many Jews are left? I mean, it's maybe not like that today, but even 10 years ago, it was like that. Okay, so when you see suicide bombers, that are coming through and car ramming attacks, and these people have been incited since the time they were kids through UNRWA institutions to kill Jews. Okay, so Israel didn't really have a mechanism to kick them out of the country at the time. They should have done it a long time ago, but there wasn't a trigger that they had in place. And so now Israel has that trigger. And certainly you see the link ups between Sinwar and Hamas and UNRWA. So they finally got the move that they needed the opportunity that they needed to get in order to kick UNRWA out. And I think it's one of the most important moves that they've made. Now, the follow-up question there is, well, what happens in the absence of UNRWA, right? If UNRWA is the ones running the schools, if UNRWA is the ones distributing the humanitarian aid, so if they're not able to operate anymore, so that creates a vacuum of leadership. Israel said that Hamas is not going to govern the Strip. Israel said that UNRWA is not going to govern the Strip. Israel saying that the Palestinian Authority is not going to govern the Strip. So the question is, who is going to govern the Strip? And I'm not sure if you asked this question, but I think that what you're going to see happen is that Israel is going to take a much more assertive role in the governance of the Gaza Strip, in the distribution of the humanitarian aid, and is going to look for ways to find local Palestinians that might have some sort of like regional responsibilities, whether you call it mayors or sheiks that are running different areas, but they're going to have to answer to the state of Israel and work with the state of Israel. So you're seeing now that Israel's now breaking down this communal structure, and then the longer term question is what's going to happen with the Palestinian Authority and the Fatah movement, which is basically the other side of the coin of Hamas, that's also funding, also works with UNRWA, and is also funding terrorists again that are killing Jews that are sitting in Israeli prisons, or funding the families of those who are killed in the act of first degree murder. It's called the Martyrs Fund, as part of the Pay for Slay program. So as this war goes, we have to see, Israel's degrading Hamas. Israel's now passed important legislation to ban UNRWA. We have to see what will happen with the Palestinian Authority next. That's a good question.
So before I open this up to audience questions, you brought up a couple points that all I think tied together. We've made some allusions to depends on who wins this election next Tuesday. And what I want to know is how important a strong U.S.-Israel relationship is to Israel's survival and to the perceptions of Israelis in pursuing this war to a victory. And I bring this up because we've talked about the international community demonizing Israel, accusations of genocide. This is at the UN, the ICC. You brought up the ICJ. We've got Britain, the EU, France, Spain, Ireland, Netherlands, all imposing a partial or full arms embargo on Israel. And now the US, under the Biden-Harris administration, is threatening that as well, to join them if there aren't certain things met regarding humanitarian aid and whatnot. So, with this, I just think it's very important for our audience to understand this issue. I believe that a very strong U.S.-Israel relationship is so critical to Israel's national security, but as well as ours in the U.S. From an Israeli perspective, how do you all see the U.S.-Israel relationship right now?
Well, I think when you look at the treatment that Israel's received from the Biden administration, which on the one hand is seemingly somewhat supportive and helps to provide weapons, and specifically, in addition to some offensive weapons, but not all, missile defense and capabilities that are critical to protecting the home front. Israel's certainly a lot stronger with a strong America that is fully aligned with the state of Israel behind it. But as Israel's seen, that it cannot necessarily count on the United States, on its allies in Western Europe and elsewhere to be fully supportive of it. And they've already hinted very clearly that there could be economic sanctions against the Jewish state and specific Israelis and organizations, and that there could be arms embargoes. And so when people in Israel liken this war in many ways to the War of Independence, well, this isn't a war of independence for establishing boundaries and borders, but it is becoming a war for Israel's full independence, because it cannot rely and should never rely on the United States or any other country to protect it. Israel's military doctrine has been, or I've heard the prime minister and I've heard former ambassador to the United States, Ron Dermer, say countless times Israel defends itself by itself. And that means also having the weapons to do that. Now, we can buy weapons from the United States, but we shouldn't be relying on the United States for weapons. So when we talk about a second war of independence, you're talking about being weapons independent. You're talking about being energy independent. You're talking about being food independent, full independence. So I think that there are some important lessons here for the state of Israel, and we're looking, at the relationship in a little bit of a different light. Nobody's coming to save the state of Israel over here. If Israel wants to establish itself as the superpower in the region, as a strong force that can't be defeated, it's going to have to do it on its own. And so I think that the lessons learned were important lessons, and even if the administration turns over in next week, I think those lessons are still learned. And President Trump during the recent weeks has made statements many times stating that if Kamala Harris is elected president, that in 2 to 3 years the state of Israel is not going to exist. Let me tell you, there's not one Israeli that agrees with that statement. And in fact, Israelis are offended by that statement. I think that even without a strong U.S.-Israel alliance, Israel's going to figure out a way to survive and thrive. Israel, the story of the Jewish people, is so much stronger and deeper than the ties that it has for the last 75 years with the United States. This is a story of 3,000 years in development, and I've heard Ron Dermer and the state that if Israel has to, they'll fight with their fingernails. And Israelis are brave, and they're spectacular people. There's a lot of ingenuity, and Israel's going to find a way to win. Will it be easier if the United States backs it? Absolutely. Will Israel have an easier time taking out the nuclear facilities in Iran with the United States and their bunker busting technology that Israel may or may not have? Yes, it will be a lot easier to do that with the United States. If the United States decides to use its veto in the UN Security Council and use its leverage over UN agencies and over the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, they can assist Israel tremendously against this diplomatic onslaught. And I think depending on who wins the election next week is going to depend on whether the United States does that or doesn't do those things. So there's definitely a lot at stake in the short term, and but at the same time, the state of Israel is not only going to survive, but it's going to thrive here in the Middle East.
Yeah, I thank you for that answer, Alex. I think Israelis are tremendously brave and but unique people. They're survivors. American Jews, I think are don't understand that side of you all, and it's really admirable. If I could go on with tons of adjectives to describe it, but I'm going to try to get in a couple questions before we have to go. So somebody asked, and I don't know if you can answer that, but this is on topic. So I'm going to ask you, why have major US media, CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, why have they been so anti-Israel in their coverage of the Hamas-Israeli war?
Yeah, in some cases you have to look at who actually owns those publications. They're not all owned by the United States funders. In some cases you have Chinese ownership, and some cases Qatar, even on CNN, Qatar provides a lot of the advertising and other other financing or indirect financing into organizations like CNN and others. And then you also have a lot of progressive owned um, media outlets. For example, like Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, and they turned their their slogan a few years back into "Democracy dies in darkness." So okay, and you also have to acknowledge that it's not only anti-Israel. A lot of these publications, they're not they're promoting anti-American values in their publications. So, Israel is just one component of a larger problem here that we're only now scratching the surface of at the end, which is, a progressive and anti-American policy. And certainly the progressives that are against America, the last thing they want is if America will drop the banner of global morality. The last thing they want is for the state of Israel to come and pick that banner up and wave it around. So, they view Israel as just a greater threat to them, or as in many ways similar to what the Ayatollahs in Iran say, that Israel's the little Satan and America's the big Satan. So nobody's going to want Israel to thrive in the place of America. So look, some of these it's just a bad outlook. I think a lot of progressive media, and you actually have it in Israel too. You have a lot of progressive media in Israel. That's a sad fact.
Yeah, I think that Haaretz is as bad, if not worse, than any publication in the US. Um, as somebody asked, how long can Israel economically continue this war?
Well, there's certainly a major economic component of the war, and the Iranians and Hezbollah and Hamas, they know that, and that's why they're not in any rush to declare a ceasefire, because every day that Israel's fighting, they're doing economic damage to the state of Israel. Thank God the state of Israel is a financially secure country, and while growth has been down and the tourism industry has been destroyed, and obviously investment into the Israeli economy is slowed down as well. The Israeli economy is on pause. It's not been destroyed in any way, shape, or form, to the extent that when this conflict ends, God willing, with an Israeli victory, you're going to see the economy hopefully pick up and restore itself back to where it was. Israel's a country that has over $200 billion in foreign currency reserves. And Israel's going to find a way. I think Israel's a lot more financially sound, even though the war cost Israel much more than it cost Hezbollah or Hamas, or even Iran to that extent. But Israel's in a much, much better financial position than any of its enemies right now. And I don't think that there's a great concern that the greatest threat to Israel right now is whether or not they can afford to continue this war, even if it takes another year or more.
Um, Someone asked, thank you, Alex, why won't the US give the ultimatum to Iran with ratcheting military attacks if US citizens are kidnapped by Hamas, are not released, destroy their navy, nukes, etc.? Do you have any thoughts on threats that the US could be?
Of course, yeah, Israel could be using all of its leverage. It could have used its leverage against Qatar to make Hamas surrender earlier on. They could have used the leverage against Iran, against Lebanon. They're not doing that, and I think you're seeing that the Biden administration and the policy professionals at State Department and Defense Department ultimately don't want to see Israel win the war. Okay, they seem to be uh, willing for Israel to fight on some level. They don't want to see Israel be wiped off the map. That's why they provide additional military, additional missile defense, and they have been doing that throughout the war. But they do not want Israel to fully defeat Hamas, and they've said as much. They don't want Israel to completely eradicate Hamas. They don't want Israel to completely destroy Hezbollah and to return Lebanon to the Christian Maronite minority that lost that country to Hezbollah essentially. And they don't want the nuclear facilities hit. They don't want the oil facilities hit, and they don't want the regime that runs Iran overthrown. And perhaps that's because they push policies of balance throughout the Middle East, where they try to balance Israelis against the Palestinians. They try to balance Israel against Iran. They try to balance the Saudis against Iran. but for whatever reason, they seem intent that they don't want Israel to be the grand victor of this conflict.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's 1 o'clock. I know there's a number of questions still left in the queue. We're not going to be able to get to them. If anybody wants to have me send something on to Alex, please feel free to email me your question. But Alex, we greatly appreciate your time. I know you're very busy. We wish JNS the great, I should just say thank you to what you're doing at JNS. It's tremendously important. People are asking questions about how you can work with conservative outlets in the US to maybe help get the news from.
Well, we do that. Since the war started, I've personally done like 600 plus interviews with mainstream media, often appearing on conservative publications as an analyst, as have my colleagues like Carolyn Glick and Jonathan Tobin. Publications like the New York Post and Newsmax and the National Post in Canada are syndication partners of JNS, and we're always looking for more syndication partners. And we're providing analysis like this on a daily basis, both through our articles, which you can find on our website at jns.org, and you can find them also in our newsletter. We're sending over 150,000 emails every day, twice a day, actually, twice a day emails with news reports, and also doing long form analysis on YouTube on our JNS TV YouTube channel. I have a podcast called Jerusalem Minute. Carolyn Glick does several times a week, Jonathan Tobin, and we have former ambassador Mark Regev and Ruthie Bloom doing a podcast, and a few others. So there's lots of ways to get good information if you want. And I'll just suggest also that we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and because we're not writing what we write to make money. It's not, this isn't about money. We write what we write because it's right, and fortunately we're a reader supported news organization, and readers have helped us to continue to grow. So we encourage people to come get their information from JNS, and if they like this information, they want more people to see it, then they can help support us so we can grow. And by the way, I'll also put in a plug for Emet, because what you guys do is incredible. I've been a friend of the organization for many years already, and Sarah Stern is a personal hero of mine, and you, Ori, as well. And you're tireless activists and defenders for the state of Israel. So whoever is I know you guys punch well above your weight in terms of your own budget. So if you're supporting Emet, thank you. If you can support a little bit more, do that. If you're not supporting Emet yet, support Emet. It's a worthwhile organization to support. So you guys have my blessing and endorsement.
Thank you so much, Alex. And both Sarah and I have been published on numerous times in JNS, and we'll continue to write for you guys, and we hopefully can continue to work together. Thank you so much for everything you do and for your kind words about the work we do at Emet. Thank you all for joining this afternoon. I wish everybody a good afternoon.